If our actual population centers are becoming unlivable, now the solution is let's start tearing down the forests and to build more housing. We're just going to have the same problem again. It's going to repeat itself unless we enforce the laws. So the New York Times has this article. Senate Republicans are resurrecting a plan to sell millions of acres of federal land as part of President Trump's giant tax and spending bill, setting up a fight within the party. The proposal will require the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service to identify and sell between 2.2 million and 3.3 million acres of public land across 11 western states to build housing. Past efforts to auction off public land have enraged conservationists and have also proved contentious with some Republicans. A smaller proposal to sell around 500,000 acres of federal land in Utah and Nevada was stripped from the House version of the tax bill. And so that's the plan to do this for housing. The draft legislation requires that the public lands be sold for the development of housing or to address associated community needs. Now, this is where my environmentalist side comes out, which really shouldn't surprise anyone. The biggest environmentalists in the country are always going to be conservatives who like to hunt or fish. We are the real environmentalists. We just don't call ourselves that because the label has a ton of baggage. The label really means in practice communist. You know, like every time it's used, we're talking about a communist, and we aren't communists. And we also don't believe in carbon taxes or any of that nonsense. And we're not worried about global warming. We don't have any climate change superstitions. So we are environmentalists in the Teddy Roosevelt tradition. Back then, they didn't use the term environmentalist. They said naturalist, right? And I think we need to bring that term back. That's what we need to start saying. I'm a naturalist, not an environmentalist. A conservationist, is also a word that's used sometimes. That also is a bit loaded now. It has some baggage, but better than environmentalist. And conservationist, I'm a conservationist too. I believe in conservation of the natural world, absolutely. And as a naturalist, as a conservationist, I really hate the idea of selling off millions of acres of pristine wilderness. I really hate it, and I'm opposed to it. Preserving nature, preserving our land, preserving land to hunt and fish and just to exist, just to have it, even if you're not using it for anything, that really matters, and it's not a small thing. And the idea of leveling so much of that land to build housing is grotesque to me. I really hate the idea. And I'm not convinced that it's necessary at all. I mean, if it was actually necessary, if we really needed to, if we actually needed to, then yes, I would say begrudgingly that, well, you have to. I mean, homes for people must take precedence over nature. People are more important than trees. Although the trees, it's a little bit of a false dichotomy because the trees and nature and wilderness, they bring joy to people. It's beauty. It's one of the things that makes life worth living. And so it's because human beings have such great value that also nature and trees and wilderness has value. But anyway, if there really was if you had to, if it was actually necessary, then my view on it would change. But I'm not convinced that it's necessary. I mean, there are like 15 million vacant homes in America right now. Now, granted, not all of them are available for sale or rent, but 30+% of them are available for rent right now. And about 1 million homes, I think, are currently listed on the market for sale. And you might say those numbers, especially the for sale numbers, are low. Fine. But is the only solution to sell off millions of acres of wilderness to build housing? I'm not convinced by that. I don't buy that at all. And what kind of housing are we talking about? Are we talking about, because if we're talking about selling off our public land to build mansions and estates for the wealthy, well, I have a huge problem with that. But if we're also talking about selling off land to turn them into low-income housing units, I have a huge problem with that too. Now, there's room in between those extremes, I suppose, but my worry is that it would end up being one or the other. And whatever it is, whatever kind of housing it is, I don't think we need to sell off our land to do it. If we have an issue of needing more housing, I mean, let's look at things like zoning laws that make it difficult to build new units in already occupied areas. Let's look at all the vacant housing in cities across the country. Let's look at, because you might say, well, yeah, there's vacant housing in this city. There's places to live, but nobody wants to live in those places because they are crime-ridden cesspools. Okay, fine, that's fair. So let's look at that. Let's solve that problem. Okay, if our actual population centers are becoming unlivable, and so now the solution is let's start tearing down the forests and to build more housing. How about the area? Well, we're just going to have the same problem again. It's going to repeat itself unless we talked about in the opening, enforce the laws. These cities do not need to be unlivable cesspools. They really don't. You could turn it around like that. You really could, just by enforcing laws that are already on the books. That's all it takes. And so let's talk about doing that. Let's look at places that have abandoned shopping malls and office complexes that could become housing. There are other solutions, and I don't think we need to do this, and we shouldn't. And I think that this is the kind of thing that conservatives should be against. Now, we're also practical as conservatives. So again, if it was actually necessary, then yeah, you got to make the practical decision sometimes. And it might be unpleasant, but sometimes you got to make a practical decision. I don't believe that it is necessary. And if it isn't, then I think the conservative view on this is, well, it's right there in the title, conserve. And I think, yes, I think that also applies to conservation of the natural world. There are plenty of things that are done in the name of conservation that are insane. Okay, telling us that we can't drill for, it's like telling us that we can't exploit our own natural resources because it might disturb the caribou or some species of tortoise or something. That's crazy. There are plenty of things done in the name of conservation that are crazy, but conservation itself, in theory, in principle, rather, is a good thing, and we should do it. And I think we should do it here as well. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.